Conceptually, we knew we had to reinvent the show.
Season 7 really was the pressure of a Season 6, which didn't pan out.
We had sort of written ourselves into a corner.
The beginning of Season 7, frankly, is a bit of a blur to me.
There was this writer's strike that happened, and I mean, it's all a confluence of events.
We had to play a game of catch-up, and for the first 8 episodes, we wrote frantically, just keeping ahead of ourselves.
For a while, they looked like the whole thing was going to go down the tubes.
Don't even think about it. You want to get yourself killed, you won't save Josh.
Season 6 was not our strongest creative year, but I think it got sort of outsized criticism for a number of reasons.
Not only ratings-wise, but politically, we got some heat for the first time. There was an article in the New Yorker about 24 and torture and promoting torture, and it felt like the show was on trial.
We needed to make some more radical changes to the franchise than we had made in Season 6.
Season 6 ended in this very peculiar 24 moment with Jack at this precipice. Other endings suggested new beginnings. This one was like, whoa, he's got no one. He's like on this existential moment.
We were kind of at a similar precipice that Jack was at, writing-wise and story-wise.
I call the different starts at the beginning of Season 7 Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3. Mark 1 was the result of working from the time Season 6 finished for 3 months.
You know, we came back in Season 7, you know, knowing that we had to come up with something, you know, to pull ourselves out of the depths, and it was a tough assignment. We did what we usually do in the writer's room at the beginning of the seasons, is just sit down and just throw out ideas and try to see what anything sticks, and nothing was sticking. And we ultimately settled on, you know, an Africa plot.
We worked for 3 months on a premise in Season 7 where Jack was going to start the season in Africa, where we're going to tell 2 or 3 hours in Africa.
Our first instinct was that Jack was off in some exotic location wandering the earth.
We were telling parts of the story that we ended up telling.
It was basically the spine of what would become the prequel later.
We were also telling the story in Washington of Renee.
So we sort of had these 2 parallel actions that we were going to follow, and we were going to do a time jump after 3 episodes or so. Jump to 12 hours later, Jack escapes to the United States, where he's actually joined up with this woman, Renee.
Jack, what the hell are you doing?
We just thought there was an opportunity to break the mold of the show. We'll actually skip ahead. It's like, why not? We'll do real time, but we'll do 2-3 weeks later after the first 4 episodes. Some of us, purists, said, no, that's not 24. 24 has to be one 24-hour period.
What we were going to do after the time jump wasn't quite feeling right.
And this idea of joining Jack and Renee, breaking their stories separately and joining them up, just didn't work. And we knew it didn't work because we wrote 3 scripts. We're into July, and we read the first drafts of these scripts, and we all look at each other and said, by mutual consent, this just isn't working. So that's a Saturday. And we say, shit, what are we gonna do? And finally coming up on Sunday with an idea, okay, what if Jack is bad?
A second script was written fairly quickly, which I call Mark 2, which involved Jack under deep, deep cover and the audience not even knowing that he was undercover, and he was acting like a bad guy for several episodes.
Maybe we can believe it after the end of Season 6, when he seemed to throw away his gun and he seemed to be so disillusioned with the government.
The first script was written for that, as well as a second and part of a third script was written for that.
Jack being bad just never gelled. I mean, it would just, and Kiefer didn't like it because he was rightly pointed out that no one's gonna believe it. They know we're BSing them. So we're just waiting around for, you know, the moment where we reveal, hey, he's not bad.
And the audience needs to really perceive things through Jack, and this sort of hide-and-go-seek with his real motivations just wasn't really satisfying.
So that's another 2 or 3 weeks of writing, desperately writing, and we decided that didn't work. Now, by now, the studio is getting very, very concerned. Our actors are getting very, very concerned. Our crew's getting concerned, because now we make our first delay. In a desperate kind of Hail Mary moment, Manny and Evan came to my house that Saturday after a very, very tough night, and he said, here's an idea that actually we had talked about a long time ago as a hybrid of an idea.
Mark 3 ended up being the beginning of the season that we did.
Why not actually put Jack on trial at the beginning of the season?
Will the witness please state his name?
Jack Bauer.
That was something we had in our back pocket, something that was pitched earlier, I think late season 6.
Put Jack in front of a Senate committee of these people who were saying the same things that were being said about the show in the press.
So we were able to now address all the criticism we received in year 6 for glorifying torture, which was never our intent, but that's how some people perceived it.
Sir, we need Mr. Bauer immediately.
He's enlisted out of that to find someone who is, the thieving crew for these components. What if it's Tony?
One of the men behind this threat is someone you know.
So I think the idea of bringing back Tony became more palatable and more interesting because we brought him back as a bad guy instead of as a savior, which I think may have been a little eye-rolling, it's a little bit, soap opera-y.
Suddenly, I honestly had that intuitive feeling of I could breathe. I felt like I could breathe because it really felt like all the tumblers had locked into position, and we really rebroke the story that afternoon, much of it, or the gist of it. I called Dana Walden. I pitched to Dana Walden this new thing. She goes, "I love it," and that became the genesis of season 7.
At this point, we had pushed production several times because of all these different versions and all these different changes. And even with the push, we were right up against the wire. Every script, every moment.
And I've only been on the show for 3 years. Other guys have been on for 6, and they're tired.
It's like doing 6 marathons, and then we kind of started a 7th marathon going in the wrong direction, and a car picks you up, puts you at the starting block, and says, "All right, do it again," and you go off in the wrong direction. By the time we got to episode 8, we were tired and barely making our dates.
All this stuff came together, just fatigue and stress and the lack of an idea, turned it into a real firestorm.
Manny Coto and I used to work together on Star Trek.
After I left Enterprise, it came to 24, and we were looking for writers. I knew Brandon would be perfect for the show. I called him and I told him what a great environment this was, how everyone gets along. We write in the mornings and we pal around and we go into the smoke room in the afternoons and swap stories, and every once in a while we'll go off and have lunch or whatever.
So I come in and people just screaming at each other.
Everybody was extremely stressed. Nothing like this had ever happened. And he's looking at me like, this is not what you said it was, because there were screaming matches. And from his office he could hear yelling.
It was so tense, and it was, all in the spirit of making the show as good as it can be, and everyone being friends, but things can get very heated. So I come here, and it's explosive.
Just when we thought things couldn't get worse, there's a writer's strike.
We produced 8 episodes, and the writer's strike happened.
All done. And suddenly we couldn't write anymore. Suddenly our days were filled with picking up picket signs and marching up and down in front of Fox.
At the time of the writer's strike, we were practically finishing scripts when they were about to start production. It was crazy.
By the first week of the strike, it became clear that even if the strike was resolved within the first week, we would never make this season. So it was one of the first announcements during the strike that 24 was going to be held off.
24 would be delayed a year.
After season 6, a bad year. So we were, was this the end of the show? I mean, part of us were thinking, this is it, it's over.
We were concerned, but I think even intuitively we started saying, you know what, it's probably not so bad taking a little break.
A mixture of relief and horror, because the strike's a bad thing. I don't care what side of the strike you fall on. It's bad for everybody. A perverted kind of relief in that we were really heading to, under the gun. And it gave us a chance to take a breather and get our bearings.
Let's just say the strike couldn't have come at a better time.
The burden of having 2 false starts, essentially, we were having a very difficult time recovering and getting things on schedule.
And so when it came time to come back on the air, it was 18 or 19 months before, since that moment on the cliff in season 6.
We were all terrified people would forget about it. Fortunately, they didn't.
Jack! Put down your weapon. Now!
So when we came back, we were in pre-production again. We were able to, fix things we didn't like in the first 7 episodes and adjust story elements in 9 and 10 and onward to fit. So we were able to kind of rethink a little bit of the season.
Because they were pushing the season the entire year, they wanted a taster for the audience to put out there earlier.
swear.
Well, it came from a conversation I had with Dana Walden, who said, the network is concerned. Can you do something on the internet just to get the audience, have them have something?
Now, fortunately, one of the ideas that we had fiddled with at the beginning of season 7 was starting Jack in Africa.
And we started pitching about, the stuff from Africa. What if can we reconstitute any of that?
Where's Mr. Benson? Not coming.
I talked to the writers, and we came up with the idea of the prequel, which actually not only was good by itself, but actually made the first 8 episodes better.
And strangely enough, this season 7 was conceived, written, and filmed without the prequel ever in mind. And yet now, in retrospect, it's very difficult to imagine this season without the prequel, which sets up so many different elements.
General, didn't expect to be hearing from you directly.
We didn't lay the groundwork for some of these characters.
I've already lost my son.
We introduced a president whose son had committed suicide, but the father believed that he was murdered. But we never met the son, so we didn't get to feel that.
We limited the damage. But you haven't eliminated it.
So imagine coming into season 7 just like, whoa, okay, there's this woman named President Taylor and her son's dead, and that was a Sangala, what?
You want my mother to clean up your mess?
That was all going to be just presented as is. So I think the prequel turned out to be a huge blessing in disguise.
Kids in the trees. In the trees now, move!
What's nice about it is that some of the stuff that we worked on during that horrible period of tossing ideas out was able to be used.
You're not my father.
I'm your brother, and you do what I say.
No.
It gave us a chance to do something we'd never done, which was obviously put Jack in a different environment from the United States and Africa, and do a kind of story which we hadn't done, which is really more of a Western. After Redemption, sure, there was a definite uplift, but we were still concerned about season 7, frankly, because season 7 is very different from Redemption.
18 was the bombshell episode where we revealed Tony Almeida's the villain of the whole show. We knew exactly what we were doing up to that point. Then in 19 and 20, we just kind of hit a creative wall. We all struggled. Not that the whole season hadn't been a struggle, but we really had a couple of episodes that could have worked just fine, would have worked just fine, but weren't quite. I think we all kind of knew these aren't quite there.
None of us thought it was our strongest creatively, but sometimes you just have to make the air dates come up or the shooting dates come up. In this case, it was something that really came from Kiefer and John and Michael Click, and from the production side. I mean, it is a very collaborative show. These guys really felt strongly that 19 and 20 weren't working.
And he was right. And we just, at that point, I think we were kind of at a let's just keep going and get through this mentality, which was the wrong mentality.
The original 19 we had that I'd written with others was something where Jack figured out that Tony was bad within the first act.
You be careful out there. I still think Ellis has a partner. You watch your back.
I think there was a climate here that believed Jack shouldn't be too far behind the 8 ball. He shouldn't be too much of a dupe. He should know things before others do. So I think we rushed it.
We really had a very simple choice, and I really let it go to Dana Walden and Gary Newman. I said, guys, I don't think these are our strongest scripts. I think if you give us a couple of weeks to shut down, I think there's a way to reapproach this.
And so we stopped and shut down for 2 weeks.
By the way, this happens. And I'm glad it happened. I think we're all glad it happened. We just rejiggered it, rewrote it, and they're much, much better episodes. I mean, so much better than what was there.
It turned out to be a great gift. It cost money and it cost time, but creatively, we had the luxury of doing it right, and that's the best thing anybody could ask for.
Is this what you're looking for?
I think every year on 24 is challenging. I think this is easily the most difficult show on television to write.
Jack has taken some pretty heavy hits, and we don't ignore that. We address that. He's a real person to us.
Given all the fits and starts, this turned out to be, I think, one of our strongest seasons creatively.
These shutdowns, which I know they wouldn't do in the past, we were able to take advantage of them and really focus on trying to find the right story to tell, and I think we did it nicely.
Season 8's starting to look a lot like Season 7. As far as the conception goes. We've been working on it for 2 months, maybe longer, and we just now settled on something we think works.
We also are, I think, acknowledging that the show again needs to change up, that we can't underdo that. The more he's lost, and the more he's gone through, the more isolated that character is, and the fewer our choices are.
Don't let them use me to kill innocent people.
None of that time, however tumultuous, was wasted. None of it. And we're hoping the same is true for season 8 as well.